All right, let's talk Bills. Since the NFL draft, they brought in Poona Ford.
Yep.
Might seem, like a nothing move, but he's a good, solid run stopper coming off a not as good year, but historically he's been good in the run game. Ed Oliver is another one of those defensive tackles from the class of 2019. The last time we really saw an influx of good defensive tackles, but Ed Oliver gets re-signed here, Sam. You got the terms of Ed Oliver's extension here?
4-year, $68 million contract, including $45 million guaranteed. That's an average salary of $17 million.
What were your initial thoughts on Ed Oliver?
It feels like a bit of an overpay. Ed Oliver is fascinating because everybody was comping Kalijah Kancey to Aaron Donald, right? Pitt, small, undersized defensive tackle, same school, same kind of dimensions, same athleticism, et cetera, et cetera. Ed Oliver is another one of those players that got sort of Aaron Donald comps or was in that Aaron Donald mold because, 6'1", 287 pounds, and moves like a linebacker or defensive back. Have you ever seen him literally run defensive back drills, like the W drill? There's video of him doing that, and he moves like a DB or a linebacker. His athleticism skills are nuts for a guy.
Ravens requested him working out at linebacker at the NFL Combine. Yes.
Actual, off-the-ball linebacker, doing the things where they, drop into coverage and catch a football, all that kind of stuff, for a defensive tackle. So his athleticism is nuts for a guy that is, he's undersized, but he's still the guts of 290 pounds. We're not talking about one of these, every now and again you see these college players that are like defensive tackles at 245 pounds or whatever. He's not one of those guys. He is at least vaguely conventionally defensive tackle size, but can move around like a linebacker or a defensive back. In college, his run defense grades were off the charts, but his pass rushing was a little bit lower. But he was used as a true over-the-center nose tackle by Houston, and our sort of speculation at the time was, well, maybe if you just plug him into a gap and let him actually penetrate and rush the passer, that will spike and we'll get a much more sort of Aaron Donald-like profile. That hasn't really happened, and the run defense hasn't happened in the NFL either. So he's been generally, over 4 years, a better pass rusher than a run defender, but it's in large part because the run defense has been pretty bad, and the pass rushing has been good, but not great. I think overall it feels like a bit of an overpay unless you're still convinced that there's a better player in there that is waiting to, hit that true peak of his powers.
Yeah, just to add some color to your descriptions there, since entering the league, 81st percentile pass rush grade. That is good. He has been a good pass rusher. That's come on even more over the last couple seasons. Run defense grade in the 39th percentile. Now, it bottomed out in 2020. The last couple of years, right around league average-ish as a run defender, a little bit below average. Where he has been good is run stop percentage. He does make plays in the run game. So why is the run defense grade not so good and the run stop percentage is high? Why does he make those plays? He just gets moved a lot.
And in part that run stop, in part that is sort of a product of his deployment. I mean, they keep him off the field intentionally on rundowns if they can. So generally, he's seeing 2-to-1 in terms of snaps, pass rushing versus run defense. So I think it's probably easier to have decent run stop percentage numbers if you're deliberately kept off the field on rundowns and the run stops you're making are, draw plays on 3rd and long type of thing.
Yeah, so that's Oliver's profile. Now, just to line him up with the rest of the defensive tackles from that class. Remember, he was picked 8th. Quinnen Williams was picked 3rd. So Quinnen Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, Dexter Lawrence, and Christian Wilkins. Those are the other defensive tackles from the first round that have been, am I missing? I don't know if I'm missing someone off the top of my head, but those guys have all been really, really good. I mean, Ed Oliver, I think, is very clearly the 5th best of that group that I just listed as far as what they've done at the NFL level. Dexter Lawrence just made a ton of money. Quinnen Williams wants to, break the bank and be the top paid defensive tackle from that class. I mean, those are 4 legitimate players. Christian Wilkins is underrated. He has been one of our highest graded players over the last couple of years. Run defense, getting better as a pass rusher. Ed Oliver is the clear number 5 of that group. at first I thought, yeah, it might be a bit of an overpay. I don't disagree with you there, but I do look at the defensive tackle market this offseason and how, Sheldon Rankins and Shai Tuttle and, all these, Draymond Jones. I mean, Draymond Jones, who has a similar profile as Ed Oliver, maybe not as good, about $17 million a year for the Bears. So, Bears, right? Did I just make that up? Seattle, sorry.
Yeah.
Man, my mind. It's the offseason. My mind's in the offseason. So Draymond Jones just made a ton of money with a similar profile. The market for defensive tackles, because I think there's some scarcity there, the market is going crazy for anybody who's just pretty good, is good, right? Or has some pass rushing skill as a Draymond Jones does or as Ed Oliver does. So initially I thought it was an overpay. It probably is. But it's interesting to me that they're not getting up into that $20 million a year range as some of those other first-round picks. So they're not like buying into the hype from 4 years ago, basically.
The other interesting thing about that run of defensive tackles that you talked about is all the guys that became or have become really, really good were all the giant physical freaks, Like Ed Oliver, for Aaron Donald comes along, and then Ed Oliver felt like Aaron Donald comes along as a massively undersized guy. For a period of time, Geno Atkins had been the best defensive tackle in the NFL as an undersized guy, less undersized, but still undersized. So it felt, and then Ed Oliver comes into the draft in 2019, and it felt for a while like we're on this run of guys where these smaller 285-pound, 6-foot defensive tackles are actually the new way in this defense that's getting smaller and faster consistently across the board. And actually, these are the guys you want to be going after because they've been overlooked for so long. And the edge is getting these hyper athletes that can just dominate up front with speed and quickness and pass rushing moves. And then Ed Oliver kind of broke it by not becoming that guy. One of the big differences between Ed Oliver and Aaron Donald and Kalijah Kancey, I think, is Oliver didn't have the hand usage that Donald had and that Kalijah Kancey has right now. He was not anywhere near as sophisticated in terms of shedding blocks. So he can beat you into a gap with speed and quickness because he's way faster than you are. But his ability to shed the block and to, use his hands to defeat blocks is a lot worse than certainly Donald's was. And I think Kalijah Kancey's is right now. But it's just interesting that while it looked for a while like the league was going to skew smaller and faster at defensive tackle, generally the guys that have dominated since that point have been the ones where it looked like there wasn't even a place for them anymore. Like these sort of nose tackle bodies, albeit hyper athletic nose tackle bodies, but these bigger 330-pound guys that seem to be dying out. And then, Jeffrey Simmons, who's much more a conventional, like prototypical 3-tech size. Like 6 foot something, 305 pounds.
Just to back that up a little bit from the old draft model, Sam, I did mention around draft time, the guys who were 80th, 90th percentile in the draft model, the hit rate's good overall, but the hit rate is through the roof if you just put it to guys who are over 300 pounds. There's not a whole lot of guys in that 280 to 300 pound range among interior defensive linemen that have hit over the last couple of years. And honestly, Oliver's he's about a hit. I mean, he's been solid.
Right.
He fits in as solid
WAR
per
season.
A bust. No, he's certainly not a bust. But that's what's interesting about the whole dynamic. A lot of times the former 8th overall pick who gets his 4 to 7 sacks per season or whatever is still going to sign a big contract, but he's not over there breaking the bank like some of the other guys, like you said, the 300-plus pounders who are really good all around.
He's become defensive tackle Robert Ayers. You're disappointed by what he's become, but fundamentally what he's become is a good NFL player.
Good NFL player, yeah. Fine. And maybe one-dimensional, right? And that's the difference with Oliver. Like you mentioned, you kind of want to limit him on early downs. And that's the other thing, too. Remember when people were trying to say, the ESPN people were trying to say, Aaron Donald's a little overrated against the run. He'll blow some gaps, right? And there's some missed gaps in there for Aaron Donald. But overall, he is a destructive run defender. Ed Oliver's kind of like what they described with Aaron Donald. Like, he will be out of his gap. He will get blown off the ball.
Yeah.
He'll make some awesome plays as well, but he will be 5 yards down the field, 6 yards down the field. He does not hold up against double teams. And when he is trying to make those run stops where he's really good, like when he is actually trying to make the play, a lot of times he is too far upfield and blowing his gap and all that stuff. Like, that stuff is true about Ed Oliver. And then he's a good pass rusher. He's a good, not great pass rusher.
He's also, so the Aaron Donald thing, one of the differences, again, is how they're deployed. Donald is on the field all the time. They don't take him off the field for rundowns, so he isn't defending the run in the same way as Ed Oliver. Like, the way that they use Ed Oliver actually pours gas on the fire of how bad he is against the run. Like, they've basically at this point said, you are a designated pass rusher. When you're on the field, penetrate, get into the backfield, go after the quarterback. And if it's a run play, now, okay, some of these are going to be telegraphed. It's not this simple. But generally that is going to mean he plays more towards the pass and the run, which is going to make him look worse against the run. Like, it's going to lead to a lot of those plays you're talking about where he shoots upfield, abandons his gap, and big run goes through, you know? Like, yeah. Okay, if he was playing like an even split, if he was playing the way Aaron Donald plays, like every down, he would presumably moderate his play more so that he's not doing that as much because you can't.
Fair. I think that's all fair. So the other move here, so Ed Oliver, it's probably a little bit more than what he's produced, but it's not egregious.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they're not saying, oh, he's got to make the Jeffrey Simmons and Dexter Lawrence money because they were all first rounders the same year.
Right.
You know, so that part's at least good.
That's true. They've stayed away from having to sort of match top of the market money for a guy that clearly doesn't deserve.
Which happens sometimes, right? Which happens because of pedigree.
The other thing, by the way, he's still only 25 years old. I mean, we are talking about somebody that is absolutely in the middle of his, not even in the middle of his prime, like approaching his prime.
Good point, because I did actually want to mention that the last couple of years have been better.
Yeah.
For Ed Oliver, all around as well. You know, run defense, pass rush. He's starting to get a little bit better.
Right.
So there is something to maybe this next stretch will be his prime, and that's what we're banking on here. Mm-hmm. And then the other move is signing Leonard Floyd, who had been released by the Rams, had been on the market for since getting released. He went through free agency. Nobody signed him or anything, and I think it's a solid move. I mean, look, these are moves made in April, May, and June, post-draft or whatever, are not the difference between Super Bowl and, divisional loss. But you just start stacking up solid moves. And I think that's what the Bills are doing here. Floyd has a history of being a good run defender on the edge, and he's another solid pass rusher, right? And I do think the Rams overpaid him a couple of years ago because he had his big 10-sack season where the pass rush grade looked exactly like all of his previous seasons, and you could almost predict the regression of his sack totals. But just in 2021, he was the number 15 most valuable edge defender during the Super Bowl run. And then last year dropped off, had his worst year since 2017. So I struggle with these guys sometimes, Sam. Like when you're in year 6, 7 in your career and you hit a dip, as Leonard Floyd did last year, does that mean, okay, it's over?
Right.
Or do you buy back, do you buy low and say, hey, let's get him back to that solid player that he was? Because he's got a pretty good history of just being solid.
Right. I mean, I haven't seen money on this one, but it's a 1-year deal, so I'm assuming it's not a ton. But this is just adding options, really. Like, you look at their defensive front now, and you've got Von Miller, who's still working his way back from injury. Who knows if he'll be ready for week 1 or how much of the season he'll last, but is a pretty integral part of that defense. Ed Oliver, Poona Ford has been added, Daquan Jones, Jordan Phillips has been brought back. Then you got the young guys, Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham. Leonard Floyd has been added to that group of edge rushers who, if Von Miller doesn't make it back in time or isn't the same guy or goes down hurt again in a key stretch of the season, they will hope that they can lean on Leonard Floyd a little bit if Rousseau and Epinesa and Basham haven't taken the step forward that they were supposed to last year when Von Miller was opening things up, and it didn't really happen. So it's really everybody in this world of like high-end contender, Bills, Bengals, Chiefs, Eagles, it's this really difficult, like, what do you do to separate yourself from everybody else? Because everybody's insane. Like, everybody's roster is nuts. Everybody has the QB. Everybody has the coaching. Everybody expects to be in the Super Bowl, but only one of you can from either conference. So how do you try and separate yourself from everybody else? And I think the only conclusion you can come to is just keep adding options and depth until it reaches a point where it's having a negative effect on your future ability to do that.
I also I don't know if this is by design or not, but Leonard Floyd adds another body type. So the way it's not even another body type, it's like another Gregory Rousseau body type. But the same way I mentioned how the Chiefs have guys that could play defensive tackle, they could play edge. They've got a big, long Charles Omenihu now. You've got a Chris Jones that can line up everywhere. The Bills now have, super long pass rushers in Gregory Rousseau and Leonard Floyd. We know they have the undersized Ed Oliver. You've got Von Miller when he's healthy. Just different players. Even Jordan Phillips at 350 pounds. You just have different body types that maybe you can get a little bit game plan specific for some of these guys and week to week specific. It just adds a ton of depth, which I love. So, look, I think I'm all in on all the buy lows, right? You take Leonard Floyd and Poona Ford coming off their worst seasons.
Yeah.
If they can just get back to where they were in 2020, 2021, you got a good solid defensive front there. That's added some help here in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
So good job, Bills, and good job making moves in June so we have something to talk about on our Monday podcast. That's the most important thing. We can add a little bit of color to some, just one-off moves here for 20 minutes.
Yep.